The story took place in the winter of 1990. Jonson was a shy and socially awkward young man. After finally gathering enough courage to ask a stranger girl for her contact information, the piece of paper with her number was blown away by a speeding truck. When he asked the girl to write it down again, she rejected him right away. She told him it was a sign that fate didn't want them to be together. After Jonson desperately tried to convince her to stay, Sarah decided to give him one more chance. She took Jonson to a hotel, planning to let a simple game decide their future. If they randomly pressed the same floor number, it would mean they were meant to be together at that moment. Sarah casually threw one of the gloves she had just bought to Jonson, then turned around without hesitation and pressed her own floor button. Jonson stood alone in front of the wall of buttons, completely lost. After hesitating for a long time, he randomly pressed one. Maybe it was because their hearts were somehow connected. But Jonson and Sarah surprisingly chose the exact same floor, the 23rd floor. Just when Jonson was filled with hope, a little boy ran into the elevator and pressed every single button on the panel. Sarah stepped out of the elevator with excitement in her heart, but after looking around, she couldn't find Jonson anywhere. A deep sense of disappointment quietly filled her heart, but she didn't leave immediately. Instead, she stayed by the elevator doors, hoping for a miracle. Yet every time the doors opened, Jonson was nowhere to be found. Just when Sarah finally lost hope and stepped back into the elevator to leave, Jonson happened to walk out of another elevator. He refused to let them miss each other again, so he chased after her outside the hotel. Luckily, Sarah hadn't gone far. However, from Sarah's perspective, these endless missed chances were clearly fate's answer. It seemed to be telling her that maybe they were never meant to continue. So when Jonson confessed his feelings again, Sarah still rejected him. But seeing how desperately Jonson begged her not to give up, Sarah decided to give their connection one last chance. She took out a $5 bill and asked Jonson to write his address and phone number on it. Then she turned around, ran into a nearby convenience store, and used that very bill that carried their fate to buy a pack of chewing gum. Jonson looked at her in confusion and asked what she meant. Sarah told him, "If this $5 bill ever finds its way back to me someday, I'll call you. And when you hear my voice, you'll know that fate wanted us to be together." Although Sarah's idea seemed completely unreasonable to Jonson, he still couldn't bring himself to let her go. So Sarah came up with an even fairer test. She took out a copy of Love in the Time of Cholera and wrote her name and phone number on the first page. She planned to sell the book to a used bookstore. If the book ever ended up in Jonson's hands someday, that would be fate giving him the answer. But Jonson knew deep down that this was nothing more than a distant star, something he could see but could never reach. The moment of goodbye eventually arrived. Jonson gathered his courage and asked Sarah for her contact information one more time, but Sarah only smiled softly, kissed him gently on the cheek and whispered, "If we're truly meant to meet again, we will." Then she got into a taxi and left. Jonson just stood there frozen in place. A feeling of indescribable sadness filled his chest. He didn't even know Sarah's real name. It seemed like their connection had been destined to become a regret from the very beginning. After that, they never saw each other again. Years passed. Sarah eventually settled down in England. Through a friend's introduction, she met a man who was passionate about music. The two of them slowly fell in love. In everyone else's eyes, they seemed like the perfect couple. But behind this seemingly happy relationship, there was actually his coldness and emotional distance. He devoted all of his energy to his music career, and in his heart, Sarah always came after his work and social life. Even when he proposed, the engagement ring didn't even fit her finger. But instead of noticing her pain, he ignored her uncomfortable expression and forced the ring onto her hand. He could even let Sarah walk home alone in the middle of a heavy rainstorm. At that moment, when Sarah was standing under a roof trying to escape the rain, her eyes accidentally fell on a movie poster nearby. It was the same movie poster of Cool Hand Luke, the film Jonson had loved so much back then. 7 years had passed, but she had never truly forgotten that night. Yet the back of every $5 bill remained completely blank. Meanwhile, Jonson had also built a successful career. Under his parents' arrangement, he became engaged to another woman, but Sarah's image had never disappeared from his heart. Every time he walked past a bookstall, he would stop. Then he would pick up a copy of Love in the Time of Cholera. But the first page was always empty. One day, while Jonson was packing his clothes at home, he accidentally found the gift bag Sarah had given him. Inside the bag was the black glove she had left him, but hidden deep inside the glove, there was a small piece of paper. He slowly unfolded it. It was the receipt from when Sarah had bought the gloves years ago, and printed on it was her complete credit card information. Jonson immediately went back to the gift shop where he had bought the gloves. He hoped he could find Sarah's whereabouts through the payment records, but the employee told him that all the digital records from that time had already been deleted. Fortunately, the store had kept the old paper receipts in storage, When Jonson finally found Sarah's apartment, the landlord told him that Sarah had moved away a long time ago. At the same time, Sarah and her best friend boarded a flight to New York. This trip had only one purpose: to find the person she had once lost. She wanted to know whether the connection they shared years ago had truly come to an end. If she could meet Jonson again, she would follow her heart. But if she couldn't, she would finally let go of this relationship. After arriving in New York, Sarah immediately went to a dessert shop called Serendipity. This was where her story with Jonson had begun, but now Jonson was nowhere to be found. Looking at everything in front of her, Sarah began to question whether searching for this love was really worth it. But just as Sarah and her friend were about to leave, she didn't notice that the change the waiter had returned to her contained the contact information Jonson had left behind years ago. And even more incredibly, just moments after Sarah left in a taxi, Jonson rushed into the dessert shop. The two of them were so close, yet they missed each other once again. It was as if fate was deliberately playing a cruel joke on them. Jonson casually looked to the side. A wedding dress and words of blessing caught his attention. At that moment, he suddenly realized that Sarah might have already put on a wedding dress and married someone else. Maybe this was fate's answer for him. Maybe it was finally time to let go of the past and start a new life. He even began to wonder whether all this time he had spent desperately searching for Sarah was because he was chasing an unfinished love story, or because he had created a beautiful illusion that could never come true. With disappointment in his heart, Jonson finally gave up searching for Sarah. He decided to keep that magical night under the stars, forever buried deep inside his heart. But when the day of the wedding rehearsal arrived, Jonson, who claimed he had already moved on, still couldn't calm the emotions inside him. And his thoughtful fiancée noticed everything. After the rehearsal ended, she handed him a carefully prepared gift. The moment Jonson opened the package, he froze. Inside was the book he had been searching for all these years, Love in the Time of Cholera. His fiancée told him that every time she went to a bookstore, she saw him looking through this book. So she specially found one and bought it for him. But when Jonson opened the first page, familiar handwriting appeared in front of him once again. It was Sarah's name, the name of the person he had never truly forgotten. At that moment, Jonson finally understood. The story between him and Sarah had never really ended. Although he felt deeply guilty toward his fiancée, he still chose to tell her the truth. Then he began his journey to find Sarah. Following the address written in the book, Jonson found Sarah's home, but the scene in front of him made his heart sink instantly. A man and a woman were standing together closely, looking like they already had a happy life together. At that moment, all of his expectations turned into disappointment. Jonson could only tell himself that this was probably fate's answer. But he didn't know that the woman in front of him was not Sarah. She was Sarah's twin sister. Meanwhile, Sarah was already on her way back home. Because her best friend had suddenly gone to attend a wedding, Sarah had no choice but to leave alone. Just as the plane was about to take off, a flight attendant came over to sell headphones. When Sarah took out her wallet to pay, she realized that she had accidentally taken her friend's wallet. At that moment, a piece of writing on a banknote caught her attention. Written on it was Jonson's contact information. After all the twists and turns, fate finally gave her another chance. Without hesitation, Sarah rushed off the plane. Following the address, she found Jonson's home, but the neighbor told her that Jonson was holding his wedding at a hotel that day. Hearing this, Sarah froze. She immediately stopped a taxi and rushed toward the wedding venue. However, the traffic jam on the road made her more and more anxious. In the end, she opened the taxi door, jumped out, and ran desperately down the street. Because this time, she refused to miss Jonson again. When Sarah pushed open the doors of the hotel, what appeared before her was the silence left after a celebration. The wedding was already over. The empty banquet hall looked exactly like the loneliness inside her heart. Tears suddenly filled her eyes. All the effort, all the running, and all the persistence along the way seemed to have ended with nothing but a heartbreaking delay. Just as she was about to leave, a staff member suddenly told her something unexpected. The wedding never actually started. The groom canceled the wedding this morning. At that moment, the hopeless Sarah saw a new ray of hope. Tears quietly rolled down her face once again. She understood that maybe their connection had never truly ended, so she decided to stay in New York, continue searching for Jonson, and find the happiness they had once lost. Sarah suddenly remembered the coat she had left behind at the ice rink the night before. At that exact moment, Jonson was walking alone through the streets. As if guided by fate, he returned to the ice rink. Filled with memories on the bench, he saw a familiar woman's jacket. Without thinking, picked it up and slowly sat down in the middle of the rink. He took the black glove out of his pocket and quietly stared at it. At that moment, all the memories from the past came rushing back into his mind. Then, snowflakes began falling from the sky. Jonson lay on the ice, looking up at the sky, letting the snow land gently on him. And just then, a glove suddenly fell from above. Jonson instinctively looked at the glove in his arms. He realized that Sarah must be somewhere nearby, so he quickly turned around. The person he had missed for 7 years was standing there quietly, smiling as she looked at him. The two of them simply stared at each other. Neither of them said a word. All the longing and regret they had buried for years finally burst out in that moment. They slowly walked toward each other. Step by step, all the pain, all the despair, and all the heartbreak they once thought would never disappear were finally released and healed. This 7-year journey of fate began with a piece of paper blown away by the wind and snow. It continued through countless missed chances and endless moments of almost meeting. And finally, it found its way back to the familiar ice rink. Their story was not only about the love between Jonson and Sarah. It was also about the deepest belief that everyone carries in their heart, about destiny and true connection. We had all been like Jonson. We had gathered our courage to approach someone who made our hearts race. We had believed that getting their contact information was enough to hold on to happiness, but life often interrupted our plans with unexpected accidents. We had also been like Sarah. We had stubbornly believed in fate. We had believed in destiny. We had believed that the right person would always find their way back. So between fighting for love and waiting, between holding on and letting go, we had struggled, hoping, and quietly stayed persistent. For 7 years, they had both moved forward with their lives. They had fallen in love, gotten engaged, and tried to build stable futures. They tried to bury that unforgettable encounter deep inside their hearts. But the most beautiful thing about fate was that it never disappointed a sincere heart. That $5 bill, that old book, that single glove, and that missed elevator ride were never meaningless accidents. They were all clues left behind by destiny. They had missed each other countless times in the same city. They had been so close, yet somehow always unreachable. Many times, we also questioned whether fate was real. We gave up waiting. We chose to surrender to reality. But true connections were never erased by time. They were never blocked by distance, and they never completely disappeared. Because of a few painful missed chances, may we all have the courage to chase, the patience to wait, and the faith to believe that after all the regrets and missed opportunities, we can still embrace the person who was truly meant to find us.